The village of dreams. In the heart of the lush green valleys, surrounded by rolling hills and a river that sparkled under the sun, lay the village of Kobona. It was a place where time moved slowly, in harmony with the rhythm of nature. The rooster's crow signaled the dawn, and the crackling of firewood brought warmth to homes as families prepared for the day. Life in Kobona was simple and predictable. The men tilled the land, the women wove baskets and tended to children, and the elders told stories under the shade of the great baobab tree, passing down the wisdom of their ancestors. In Kobona, education was seen as a luxury, not a necessity. Most children learned the skills they needed from their parents. Boys became farmers, fishermen, or woodworkers, while girls learned to cook, weave, and care for their families. By the time they reached their teens, many of them were married, ready to carry on the traditions of their forebears. Beyond secondary school, education was not even a thought. For the people of Kobona, as long as a child could read and write, it was enough. But even in the stillness of Kobona, change was stirring. One bright morning, a buzz of excitement spread through the village like wildfire. A group of students from the city had arrived for an excursion. They came in a large bus that roared like thunder, its shiny metal reflecting the sunlight. The villagers, who had rarely seen anything so grand, gathered in clusters to watch as the city students stepped out, their colorful clothes and polished shoes a stark contrast to Kobona's earth-toned simplicity. The students carried books and gadgets the villagers had never seen before. They spoke of things that sounded magical, machines that could build homes, devices that could teach without a teacher, and schools where knowledge seemed limitless. They walked confidently, their heads held high, and their words were laced with dreams of careers as engineers, doctors, and scientists. The children of Kobona followed the students, wide-eyed with wonder, while the adults listened intently to their stories. The village chief, a wise man named Okwari, observed them carefully. Standing tall with his carved walking stick, he said nothing, but his mind churned with thoughts. That evening, the entire village gathered under the baobab tree to discuss what they had seen. The air was alive with energy as voices overlapped, some filled with excitement, others with doubt. "Did you see their books?" one woman said, her eyes lighting up. "Our children have never held books like those. And their stories about machines," added a farmer. "Imagine how much easier farming would be with those." Chief Okwari raised his hand, and the crowd fell silent. "The world is changing," he said, his voice steady. "Perhaps it is time we change too. For generations, Kobona has lived as our ancestors taught us. But today, I saw something new. A world where our children can dream beyond the fields and the river." The chief's words struck a chord. For the first time, the villagers dared to imagine a different future, one where their children might not only survive but thrive. But this new dream came with its own challenges. How could they afford such education? Who would they send to represent the village? The villagers deliberated for hours, and finally, a decision was made. They would send one child, a single seed of hope, to the city to study and learn. This child would carry the dreams of Kobona and bring back knowledge to transform the village. But who would it be? I turned to Amora, a 16-year-old girl with a smile as bright as the morning sun. Amora was not like the other children. She had a spark of curiosity that set her apart. While others were content with their daily routines, Amora often asked questions that left even the elders scratching their heads. She was quick-witted, kind, and hardworking, always eager to learn more than what was taught in the village school. Amora's parents, though proud, hesitated. "We are not wealthy," her mother said softly. "How will we support her in the city?" The villagers, however, rallied together. "We will all contribute," one farmer said. "Even if it is a small amount, we will make sure she has what she needs." The next morning, preparations began. The women wove a strong bag for Amora, filling it with dried fish, yams, and herbs to remind her of home. The men gathered what little money they could spare, pooling their resources to pay for her journey. The elders whispered blessings into her ears, their hands resting gently on her head. "Remember," Chief Okwari said as he handed her a small, carved wooden pendant. "This is not just for you, Amora. You carry the hopes of Kobona. Never forget where you come from." As the day of her departure arrived, the entire village gathered to see her off. Children clung to her, their eyes brimming with tears, while the adults offered final words of advice. Amora, clutching her bag and the wooden pendant, tried to hold back her own tears. "I will make you proud," she promised, her voice steady despite the lump in her throat. As she boarded the bus to the city, the villagers waved until she disappeared into the horizon. Amora was no longer just a girl from Kobona. She was their hope, their dream, and their connection to a world they had only begun to imagine. Little did they know, the path ahead would be filled with trials they could never foresee. The City of Lights. The bus rumbled into the city just as the sun began to set, casting an amber glow over the sprawling skyline. For Amora, the sight was both breathtaking and intimidating. The buildings towered above her like giants, their windows reflecting the colors of the sunset. The streets buzzed with life. Cars honking, street vendors calling out their wares, and people moving with a sense of urgency that Amora had never known in Kobona. Clutching her bag tightly, Amora stepped off the bus and into the chaos of the city. The air smelled different, a mix of food, fuel, and something metallic she couldn't quite place. Her heart raced as she tried to take it all in. Back in Kobona, everything had its place, its rhythm. Here, it felt like the world was spinning too fast, and she was struggling to keep up. She checked the crumpled piece of paper in her hand. It held the address of the boarding house where she would stay, written down by the kind teacher in Kobona who had helped her apply to the city school. Amora flagged down a rickety taxi, her voice shaking as she gave the driver the address. The man grunted in acknowledgement, and soon, they were weaving through the chaotic streets. Every corner of the city seemed to have its own story. Bright neon signs advertised things Amora didn't understand. Children begged for coins near bustling markets, while men and women in sharp suits hurried past them, eyes glued to their phones. Amora felt a pang of homesickness. Kobona, with its quiet rivers and friendly faces, felt a world away. When the taxi finally stopped, Amora stepped out in front of a modest boarding house. The building was old, with peeling paint and narrow windows, but it felt like a refuge from the overwhelming city. The landlady, a plump woman with a kind smile, greeted her at the door. "You must be Amora," she said, her voice warm. "Come in, child. We've been expecting you." The room assigned to her was small, with a single bed, a wooden desk, and a tiny window that overlooked the noisy street below. Amora placed her bag on the bed and sat down, the weight of her journey settling on her shoulders. For the first time since leaving Kobona, she felt truly alone. The struggles began. The next day, Amora began her classes at the city school. The building was massive, its corridors stretching endlessly, filled with students from all walks of life. Amora couldn't help but notice how different she looked from the others. Most of the students wore modern clothes, jeans, sneakers, and branded backpacks, while she stood out in her simple dress made of Kobona's traditional fabric. Her first class was a blur of unfamiliar words and fast-paced lectures. The teacher spoke in a mix of English and the city's local dialect, and Amora struggled to keep up. Back in Kobona, she had been the top of her class, but here, she felt like a small fish in a vast ocean. Some of the students glanced at her curiously, whispering to one another. Amora pretended not to notice, but the whisper stung. Her struggles didn't end at school. The little money the villagers had pulled together was barely enough to cover her meals and supplies. She found herself skipping lunch, stretching every coin to last as long as possible. At night, she would sit by the dim light of her desk lamp, her stomach growling as she tried to understand her textbooks. But Amora was determined. She had promised Kabona that she would succeed, and she refused to let them down. Meeting Zoe. A week into her new life, Amora met Zoe. It was during a particularly overwhelming lunch break when Amora sat alone in the corner of the cafeteria, nibbling on a piece of bread she had saved from breakfast. Zoe, a bubbly girl with curly hair and a laugh that seemed to fill the room, noticed her and walked over. "Hi," Zoe said, sitting down across from her. "You're the new girl, right? From the village?" Amora nodded cautiously. "Yes. I'm Amora." "Well, Amora," Zoe said with a grin, "you've got to stop eating bread for lunch. Come on, let's get you some real food." Before Amora could protest, Zoe grabbed her hand and led her to a nearby food stall just outside the school. Zoe ordered 2 plates of steaming rice and beans, handing one to Amora. "It's on me," Zoe said, waving off Amora's attempt to pay. "Consider it a welcome gift." Over lunch, the 2 girls talked. Zoe was a city girl through and through, but there was a kindness in her that made Amora feel at ease. She shared stories about her life in the city, offering tips on how to navigate its complexities. "Don't let the city scare you," Zoe said. "It's big and loud, sure, but once you find your rhythm, you'll love it." Amora smiled, grateful for the company. For the first time since arriving, she felt a spark of hope. A friendship blossoms. Over the next few weeks, Zoe became Amora's guide to city life. She taught her how to navigate the bustling streets, where to buy affordable school supplies, and even how to barter with street vendors to save money. Zoe's confidence was infectious, and Amora began to feel a little more comfortable in her new environment. Zoe also introduced Amora to her group of friends. Though they were skeptical of Amora's quiet demeanor at first, they quickly warmed up to her. They teased her about her village clothes, but in a way that felt more playful than cruel. One of them even offered to lend her a pair of sneakers, saying, "You can't survive the city in sandals, girl." Despite Zoe's support, Amora knew she still had a long way to go. The city was a place of opportunities, but it was also a place of challenges. Every night, as she lay in her tiny room, she would hold the wooden pendant from Chief Okwari and remind herself of the promises she had made to Kabona. "I won't give up," she whispered to herself. "No matter how hard it gets." Little did she know, her journey was just beginning. The city had much more in store for her, both its wonders and its shadows, the shadows of sacrifice. Amora sat at the edge of her bed one evening, staring at the last few coins in her hand. They barely jingled as she moved them back and forth, their weight feeling heavier than it should. Her stomach growled, a constant reminder of how little she had eaten that day. She had long since stopped buying full meals, surviving instead on bread rolls and water. The bag of dried fish and yams from Kabona had been empty for weeks, and now even the modest funds the villagers had scraped together were gone. Her schoolwork was the only thing keeping her going. Despite the hunger gnawing at her and the loneliness pressing down on her heart, she threw herself into her studies. Amora's determination earned her the respect of her teachers and even some of her classmates, who marveled at how quickly she absorbed new concepts. But while her academic star began to rise, her physical strength was fading. She refused to tell her family back in Kabona about her struggles. In every letter she wrote, she painted a picture of success and excitement. "School is going well," she would write. "Thank you for your support. I promise to make you proud." She couldn't bear the thought of adding to their burdens. Kabona was a small village, and what they had sent her had already been more than they could afford. Asking for more felt unthinkable. The breaking point. One day, Amora's exhaustion caught up with her. She had been sitting in class, scribbling notes furiously, when her vision blurred. The words on the page swam before her eyes, and a sharp pain shot through her head. Before she could call for help, she felt the word tilt sideways. The next thing she knew, she was lying on the floor, surrounded by concerned faces. The school nurse gave her a stern look as she sipped water in the infirmary. "When was the last time you ate a proper meal?" the nurse asked, her tone laced with concern. Amora didn't answer, her eyes fixed on the floor. "You can't keep going like this," the nurse said gently. "You're strong, but even the strongest need to eat." Amora nodded but said nothing. She knew the nurse was right, but where was she supposed to find the money? Zoe's suggestion. That evening, Zoe came to visit her. She carried a plastic bag of food, rice, beans, and a fried plantain, and placed it on Amora's desk. "Here," she said, her tone light, though her eyes betrayed her worry. "Eat something." Amora hesitated, but the hunger was too strong. She dug into the food, each bite filling her with a warmth she hadn't felt in weeks. Zoe sat beside her, watching quietly. "You can't keep living like this," Zoe said after a while. "You're going to burn out, Amora." "I don't have a choice," Amora replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "The money's gone. I can't ask my family for more." Zoe tilted her head, studying her friend. "There are other ways to make money, you know." Amora looked up, frowning. "What do you mean?" Zoe leaned back in her chair, a thoughtful expression on her face. "I mean, there are ways to earn money quickly. It's not the kind of thing they teach in school, but it works." Amora's heart sank. "What kind of ways?" Zoe hesitated before answering. "There are people in the city willing to pay for companionship," she said carefully. "It's not what you think, it's not dangerous if you know what you're doing. You just spend time with them. Talk, laugh, maybe dance a little. They'll pay you well." Amora's stomach twisted. "You're suggesting I—" "No." Zoe interrupted, raising her hands. "I'm not saying you have to do anything you're not comfortable with. I know how hard it is to survive here. I've seen girls from villages like yours end up worse off because they didn't have options." Amora was silent, her mind racing. She knew Zoe was trying to help, but the idea of stepping into that world felt wrong. She thought of the elders in Kabona, of Chief Okwari's words, "You carry the hopes of the village. What would they think if they knew?" But then she thought of her empty pockets, her growling stomach, and the way her body had betrayed her in class. How much longer could she endure this? The first step. The next few days were a blur of conflicting emotions. Amora continued attending her classes, though her focus wavered. Zoe didn't bring up the subject again, but Amora could feel the weight of the unspoken words between them. Every time she walked past the markets or saw someone eating a warm meal, she thought about what Zoe had said. One evening, as she lay in bed, staring at the cracked ceiling, Amora made a decision. She couldn't go on like this. She wouldn't give up her dreams, but she also couldn't continue suffering in silence. If this was what it took to survive, maybe she could find a way to do it on her terms. The next day, she approached Zoe after class. "Tell me more," she said quietly. Zoe gave her a long, searching look before nodding. "Okay. But only if you're sure." A new reality. Zoe took Amora to a small, dimly lit lounge where women in elegant dresses sat at tables, laughing and chatting with well-dressed men. The atmosphere was lively but not overly chaotic, and Amora was surprised to see that it didn't look as intimidating as she had imagined. "You don't have to do anything you don't want to," Zoe reminded her. "Just be yourself. Smile, talk, and stay firm on your boundaries." Amora felt a lump in her throat as she nodded. She wasn't sure if she could do this, but she felt like she had no other choice. That night, Amora sat with a man who seemed kind enough, though his laughter was too loud and his cologne was overpowering. He handed her money at the end of their conversation, more than she had expected. The weight of the bills in her hand felt strange, like both a blessing and a burden. When she got home, she stared at the money for a long time. It would pay for her meals and books. It would keep her afloat. But it came at a cost. A cost she wasn't sure she fully understood yet. The shadows deepened. Over the next few weeks, Amora balanced her studies with her new side hustle. She kept her interactions professional, staying firm in her resolve not to cross certain boundaries. The money eased her burdens, and for the first time in months, she felt like she could breathe. But the weight of her choices lingered. She avoided looking at herself in the mirror too long, afraid of what she might see. At night, she held the wooden pendant from Chief Okwari, whispering apologies to her village and to herself. "I'll make it right," she promised. "One day, I'll make it right." Amora didn't know it yet, but her journey was about to take a darker turn, one that would test her strength and force her to confront the true cost of her survival. Therefore, Amora's life became a delicate balancing act, a tightrope walk between her studies and the new world she had reluctantly stepped into. Each week, she met men at the lounge Zoe had introduced her to, earning just enough money to keep herself afloat. For the first time in months, her stomach was full, and her desk was stocked with new notebooks and pens. The weight of financial stress lifted, if only temporarily. But with the relief came an uneasy feeling that gnawed at her in quiet moments. Each time she handed over her earnings to pay for books or food, she felt a pang of shame, a reminder of the promises she had made to herself and her village. She avoided the wooden pendant from Chief Okwari, which now sat tucked away in a corner of her drawer. Looking at it made her heart ache. The slippery slope. What had started as small interactions, simple conversations and companionship, soon demanded more. The men she met began to expect more from her time, their smiles laced with expectations she wasn't sure she could fulfill. Zoe assured her that it was all part of the process. "You're doing great," Zoe said one night, as they sat in the dim backroom of the lounge. "Just keep your boundaries. You're in control." But Amora didn't feel in control. The more she participated, the harder it became to draw the line. The need for money, the desire to escape hunger and exhaustion, began to cloud her judgment. She started accepting offers that made her uncomfortable, each decision feeling like a compromise that chipped away at her sense of self. The lounge became both a refuge and a prison. It offered her the means to survive, but it also became a place where she felt trapped, performing a version of herself that she barely recognized. The men called her beautiful, complimented her intelligence, and showered her with money. For brief moments, she felt powerful. But those moments were fleeting, and the guilt lingered long after the night was over. Judgment and isolation. The whispers started at school soon after. Amora noticed the glances, the hushed conversations that stopped when she walked by. Her classmates, once curious about her background, now seemed distant. Some avoided her altogether, while others made no effort to hide their judgment. "She's just a village girl," one student muttered loudly as she passed in the hallway. "Trying to live the city life. We all know how she's paying for it." Amora's cheeks burned, but she kept walking, her head held high. She wanted to confront them, to defend herself, but what could she say? Their words weren't entirely untrue. The taunts grew bolder. In the cafeteria, a group of girls laughed as one of them mimicked Amora's accent, exaggerating it cruelly. "Maybe if we all walked in the evenings, we could afford new shoes like hers," one of them sneered, her voice dripping with sarcasm. Amora's fist clenched under the table. She wanted to shout, to make them understand the sacrifices she was making, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, she stared at her plate, willing the lump in her throat to disappear. Even Zoe, who had been her closest friend and confidant, began to pull away. The easy camaraderie they once shared was replaced by awkward silences. Zoe was busier than ever, spending more time with other friends and less with Amora. When Amora tried to ask her why, Zoe shrugged. "People talk," she said. "I can't control that." The weight of loneliness. The isolation weighed heavily on Amora. She began spending her evenings alone, staring at the city lights from her small window. The room that had once felt like a sanctuary now felt like a cage. She thought of Carbona, of the quiet nights under the stars, of the villagers who had placed their hopes in her. She wondered what they would think if they saw her now. The letters from home became harder to read. Her mother's words, filled with pride and encouragement, felt like daggers. "We are so proud of you," one letter said. "The whole village talks about how strong and brave you are. We know you will make us proud." Amora couldn't bring herself to write back. What could she say? That their dreams for her were slipping through her fingers? That the girl they had sent to the city was no longer the same person? Breaking point. One night, after a particularly difficult evening at the lounge, Amora returned home and sat at her desk. The wooden pendant from Chief Okwiri caught her eye, its simple design a stark contrast to the complexity of her life. She picked it up, running her fingers over the smooth wood, and tears welled up in her eyes. "What have I become?" she whispered to the empty room. She thought about the girl she used to be, the girl who had stood under the baobab tree, full of dreams and determination. That girl seemed so far away now, buried beneath layers of compromise and regret. As the tears fell, Amara made a silent vow to herself. She didn't know how, but she would find a way to make things right. She would find a way to reclaim the hope that had brought her to the city in the first place. But the path ahead was uncertain, and the shadows of her choices loomed large. Amora's journey was far from over, and the struggles she faced were only beginning to take their toll. The reckoning. Amora's body began to betray her. It started with exhaustion, a deep, unshakable fatigue that no amount of sleep could cure. She found herself struggling to stay awake in class, her once sharp mind clouded with a fog that made even the simplest tasks feel monumental. Her appetite faded, replaced by a constant nausea that made eating feel like a chore. And then there was the pain, a dull ache in her chest that grew sharper with each passing day. At first, she tried to push through it. She told herself it was just stress, that her body would adjust if she kept going. But as the weeks wore on, her symptoms worsened. Her reflection in the mirror became almost unrecognizable, her cheeks hollow, her eyes sunken and tired. The vibrant girl who had once stood under the baobab tree in Carbona was now a shadow of her former self. A worsening illness. Amora's illness was not just physical. The emotional weight of her choices bore down on her, making it harder to breathe, harder to think. The whispers at school, the cold stares from classmates, and the distance growing between her and Zoe only deepened her sense of isolation. She began skipping classes, too weak and too ashamed to face her peers. Her small stash of money dwindled quickly. With fewer trips to the lounge and her inability to maintain the demanding pace of her double life, her financial safety net unraveled. Amora found herself relying on the kindness of strangers, neighbors who brought her leftover food, classmates who left old notebooks on her desk, and even her landlady, who allowed her to stay despite missed rent payments. Each act of kindness reminded Amora of the support she had left behind in Carbona. Yet, it also filled her with shame. She had promised herself and her village that she would be strong, that she would succeed. Now, she couldn't even take care of herself. The distance between friends. Zoe, who had once been Amora's anchor, began to pull away completely. Though she occasionally stopped by to check on Amora, their conversations were brief and strained. Zoe's eyes would flicker with guilt, but she always found an excuse to leave. One day, Amora finally confronted her. "Why are you avoiding me?" she asked, her voice weak but firm. Zeri hesitated, her gaze dropping to the floor. Amora. I care about you, but I can't keep doing this. You've changed. And honestly, being around you, it's hard. People talk, and I have my own life to think about. Amora felt her heart sink. She wanted to argue, to remind Zeri of the promises they had made to support each other, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, she nodded silently, watching as Zeri walked away without looking back. Desperation and reflection. Left alone, Amora spent her days in her small room, staring at the cracked ceiling as memories of Kobona flooded her mind. She thought about the villagers gathered under the baobab tree, their faces glowing with hope as they sent her off. She thought about her parents, who had given everything to see her succeed. And she thought about Chief Okwari's words, "You carry the hopes of the village." Amora felt like she had failed them all. She had strayed so far from the path they had envisioned for her, and now she was too broken to continue. The city, which had once seemed so full of promise, had become a place of pain and regret. One evening, as the sun set and the room filled with shadows, Amora made a decision. She couldn't stay in the city any longer. It had taken everything from her. Her health, her friendships, her sense of self. She needed to go back to Kobona, to the people who had loved her unconditionally. She needed to seek healing and forgiveness. The journey home. The journey back to Kobona was both physically and emotionally draining. Amora's body was weak, her steps unsteady as she boarded the crowded bus. The familiar landscape of rolling hills and green valleys came into view, but instead of filling her with comfort, it reminded her of how much she had lost. When the bus pulled into the village, Amora hesitated before stepping off. She didn't know how the villagers would react to her return. Would they welcome her back, or would they judge her for the choices she had made? She clutched the wooden pendant from Chief Okwari, which she had taken from her drawer before leaving the city, and drew a shaky breath. As she stepped onto the dirt road, the villagers began to gather, their faces filled with a mix of surprise and concern. Amora's appearance shocked them, her once bright eyes now dull, her body frail, and her movements slow. She looked like a shadow of the girl they had sent off with so much hope. Her parents were the first to reach her. Her mother wrapped her in a tight embrace, tears streaming down her face. "Amora, my child," she whispered, her voice breaking. "What happened to you?" Amora couldn't hold back her own tears. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice trembling. "I failed you. I failed everyone." The villagers gathered around, their murmurs filled with both sorrow and understanding. Chief Okwari stepped forward, his wise eyes studying her carefully. He placed a hand on her shoulder and said, "You have returned, and that is enough. We will heal you." The beginning of healing. The days that followed were filled with care and compassion. The village's herbalist prepared traditional remedies to restore Amora's strength, while the women took turns cooking nourishing meals for her. The elders spoke to her gently, sharing stories of others who had faced hardships and found redemption. Amora spent hours sitting under the baobab tree, listening to their words and reflecting on her journey. Slowly, she began to feel a sense of peace returning to her. The love and forgiveness of her village were like a balm for her soul, helping her let go of the guilt that had consumed her. Though her path had been filled with mistakes, Amora realized that her story was not over. She had a chance to start anew, to learn from her experiences and use them to rebuild herself. Redemption in the village. Amora sat quietly under the baobab tree, the centerpiece of Kobona's life and wisdom, as the villagers gathered around her. The evening sun cast long shadows over the village, and the cool breeze carried with it a sense of both anticipation and concern. The sight of Amora's frail body and sunken eyes had left the villagers speechless. The girl they had once sent to the city, full of dreams and hope, had returned as a shadow of herself. The mamas among the villagers were subdued but pointed. "What happened to her?" whispered one woman. "She looks so weak," said another. Some shook their heads in quiet disappointment, but no one dared voice their judgment too loudly. The pain on Amora's face was clear, and even the harshest heart softened at the sight of her. Compassion over judgment. Chief Okwiri, leaning on his carved walking stick, stepped forward. His presence commanded silence. The chief's gaze swept over the gathered villagers before settling on Amora. He let the moment linger, his eyes filled with both sadness and understanding. "Amora," he said, his voice steady, "you have returned to us, and for that, we are grateful. Whatever hardships you faced, they are now behind you. Kobona does not turn its back on its own." The elders nodded in agreement. One of them, an elderly woman named Mama Tand, added, "We are disappointed, yes, but we are also your family. Our duty is to heal, not to condemn." Tears welled up in Amora's eyes as she listened. She had feared harsh words and judgment, but what she received instead was compassion. The villagers, though hurt by her struggles and choices, chose to focus on her recovery rather than her mistakes. The path to healing. The elders and herbalists of Kobona devised a plan to restore Amora's strength, both physically and spiritually. The village herbalist, Baba Kofi, prepared a series of traditional remedies using roots, leaves, and oils. Each morning, Amora was given a steaming bowl of herbal broth, its bitter taste a reminder of the healing process she had to endure. In the afternoons, the village women would sit with her, massaging her frail limbs with oils and teaching her traditional breathing exercises to restore her energy. They told her stories of resilience and survival, reminding her that failure was not the end but a lesson. The spiritual healing was equally important. The elders performed rituals under the baobab tree, where Amora was asked to sit in the center of a circle as they chanted prayers of cleansing and renewal. They burned sacred herbs, the fragrant smoke swirling around her, symbolizing the release of her burdens and the beginning of a new chapter. "You must forgive yourself," Mama Tand told her during one of these rituals. "The world is harsh, and you stumbled, but you are here now. That is what matters." Reflections and growth. As Amora's body began to heal, so too did her mind and spirit. Sitting by the river one evening, she held the wooden pendant Chief Okwiri had given her before she left for the city. She traced its intricate carvings with her fingers, remembering the hope it symbolized. Amora thought about her journey. The excitement she had felt when she first arrived in the city, the desperation that had led her down a dangerous path, and the strength it had taken to return to Kobona. She realized that while she had made mistakes, she was not defined by them. Her experiences had taught her resilience, humility, and the importance of staying true to herself. "I thought I had to face everything alone," she said quietly to herself, the river's gentle flow echoing her words. "But Kobona was always here, waiting for me." She began to think about how she could give back to the village that had supported her even in her darkest moments. Amora decided that her purpose was not just to heal but to use what she had learned to uplift others. Rebuilding herself. Over the weeks, Amora grew stronger. Her cheeks filled out, her steps became steadier, and the light returned to her eyes. The villagers noticed the change and rallied around her, offering words of encouragement and support. Even the children, who had once watched her departure with wide-eyed wonder, now ran to her with questions about her time in the city. Amora began helping around the village, teaching the younger children how to read and write. She shared stories of her time in the city, not hiding her mistakes but framing them as lessons. "The world is big and full of challenges," she told them one day, "but if you stay true to yourself and to your people, you can overcome anything." Her parents, who had worried endlessly about her, watched her transformation with pride. "You have faced storms, my child," her mother said one evening as they prepared dinner together. "And now you are stronger for it." A renewed purpose. As Amora continued to rebuild herself, she began to dream again, dreams that included not just her own future but the future of Kobona. She envisioned a village where children could dream beyond the rivers and fields, where education and tradition could coexist. She shared these ideas with the elders, who listened with interest. "Kobona sent you out into the world," Chief Okwari said one day. "And though the path was difficult, you have returned with wisdom. Perhaps now, it is time for us to listen to you." Amora smiled, her heart swelling with hope. She knew her journey was far from over, but she also knew she was no longer walking it alone. Kobona had given her a second chance, and she was determined to honor it. A new legacy. Amora sat under the baobab tree, cradling her newborn son in her arms. The soft glow of the early morning sun bathed Kobona in golden light, and the village was quiet except for the gentle rustling of leaves in the breeze. The boy, named Chisomo, meaning grace, in her native tongue, was the embodiment of a second chance, not just for Amora but for everyone in the village who had dared to dream beyond their borders. His small fingers curled around hers, and she felt a surge of determination. Chisomo's birth was more than a new beginning. It was a reminder that the future could be rewritten, no matter how far one had strayed. Balancing motherhood and education. Amora's return to Kobona had been a journey of healing, but it was also a stepping stone toward reclaiming the dreams she had once carried with her to the city. After months of recovery, both physical and emotional, she felt ready to take the next step. Though many in the village thought her responsibilities as a mother might hold her back, Amora saw Chisomo as her greatest motivation. One day, as she sat with Chief Okwari and the elders, she shared her desire to continue her education. "I left Kobona with a dream," she said, her voice steady, "and though the path has been difficult, I still believe I can fulfill it. I want to finish what I started, not just for myself, but for my son and for our village." The chief nodded thoughtfully. "Your courage is inspiring, Amora," he said. "You have shown us that failure is not the end. We will support you." With the village's blessings, Amora began taking correspondence courses while balancing her duties as a mother. Her days were long and demanding, caring for Chisomo, helping around the village, and studying late into the night by the light of a single lamp. But she pushed through, fueled by a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in years. The villagers, seeing her determination, rallied around her. The women took turns helping with Chisomo, and the elders shared wisdom and encouragement. Even the children pitched in, running errands for her and bringing her books from the nearby town. A role model for the village. As the years passed, Amora's efforts began to bear fruit. She completed her education, earning qualifications that no one in Kobona had ever achieved before. Her success became a beacon of hope for the younger generation, who saw in her a reminder that their dreams were within reach, no matter how distant they seemed. Amora took it upon herself to share her knowledge with the village. She started teaching classes under the baobab tree, where children of all ages gathered to learn about reading, writing, and the wider world. She encouraged them to ask questions, to think critically, and to dream beyond the confines of their surroundings. "Kobona is our home," she would say, "but the world is vast. Learn from it, grow, and bring that knowledge back to build a better future here." Her message resonated, and soon the village was buzzing with new energy. Parents who had once been skeptical about education began encouraging their children to attend school. The elders, inspired by Amora's vision, began discussing ways to improve Kobona's resources, from building a library to creating partnerships with neighboring villages. Returning to the city. Years later, Amora made a triumphant return to the city, not as a lost girl struggling to survive, but as a confident woman with a purpose. She had come to meet with organizations and educators who could help her bring more opportunities to Kobona. Walking through the bustling streets, she no longer felt overwhelmed or out of place. The city, once a symbol of her struggles, had now become a place where she could forge connections to uplift her village. At one meeting, she spoke passionately about her journey and the potential of Kobona's children. "Education transformed my life," she said, "and it can transform my village too. All we need is the chance." Her story struck a chord, and Amora secured partnerships that would bring books, scholarships, and even visiting teachers to Kobona. With each step, she was building a bridge between the village and the world beyond, ensuring that the next generation wouldn't face the same struggles she had. Inspiring a new generation. Amora's return to Kobona marked the beginning of a new era. The village, once content with its traditions, had embraced a vision of growth and possibility. Children who had once dreamed only of tending fields now spoke of becoming doctors, engineers, and teachers. And they all looked to Amora as their guide. Chisomo, now a bright and curious boy, often sat beside his mother during her lessons, soaking in every word. Amora saw in him the future of Kobona, a future where education and tradition could coexist, where no child would have to choose between their roots and their dreams. One evening, as the villagers gathered under the baobab tree, Chief Okwari stood to address them. "Amora has shown us the power of resilience," he said. "She has taken the lessons of her journey and turned them into a legacy that will uplift us all. Let her story be a reminder that even in our darkest moments, we can find the strength to rise." The villagers clapped and cheered, their faces glowing with pride. Amora, holding Chisomo's hand, felt a deep sense of fulfillment. She had faced the storms of the world and returned stronger, ready to guide Kobona toward a brighter tomorrow. A legacy of hope. Amora's name became a symbol of resilience and transformation, a story passed down through generations as an example of what could be achieved with courage, determination, and the support of a community. Her journey inspired countless young boys and girls in Kobona to chase their dreams while staying grounded in their values. And as the years went by, Amora continued to teach, to guide, and to dream, not just for herself, but for Kobona and the legacy she had built. Under the shade of the baobab tree, where it had all begun, she found her true purpose, not just as a survivor, but as a leader, a mother, and a beacon of hope.